Good afternoon, Assemblyman Sweeney and Gottfried and Kavanaugh. Thank you for holding this hearing on a very important public health issue and for inviting me to testify. My name is Kathy Curtis. I'm the Executive Director of Clean and Healthy New York and the co-leader of the Just Green Partnership, along with my colleague Cecil Corbin-Mark of We Act for Environmental Justice. I'm also the National Coordinator of the Alliance for Toxic-Free Fire Safety and serve on the steering committee of the Safer Chemicals Healthy Families Coalition, the Safer States Campaign, and the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments. This statement is delivered also on behalf of the following members of the Just Green Partnership who could not be here in person today: Capital Region Action Against Breast Cancer, the Center for Health, Environment, and Justice, Citizens Environmental Coalition, Citizens for a Clean Environment, the Empire State Consumer Project, Environmental Advocates of New York, Huntington Breast Cancer Action Coalition, the Institute for Health and the Environment at the University at Albany, New York Public Interest Research Group, Prevention is the Cure, and the Sierra Club Atlantic Chapter. As such, it is a pleasure to be here today. Halogenated chemicals that are sold as flame retardants are in response to a strategy put forth by the tobacco industry and the chemical industry, which deflected blame for fires away from cigarettes and onto building contents, such as draperies, rugs, furniture, and electronics. This strategy was meant to prevent the government from requiring that cigarettes be self-extinguishing, as you heard earlier, and to provide a very profitable market for brominated and chlorinated chemicals. The idea was that instead of making the cigarette fire safe, the solution was to make everything else fire safe by dousing the built environment in toxic chemicals. This was a false solution, toxic chemicals, in search of a problem. Everything must be fire retarded. As a result, toxic flame retardant chemicals are found not only in products where they may be beneficial, such as planes, trains, automobiles, in an oven door, in a heating system in a home, but also in nursing pillows, strollers, changing pads, infant carriers, other products for infants and children, and most upholstered furniture, where their efficacy is questionable at best. Therefore, newborn babies in particular may be exposed to these toxic chemicals through skin absorption, inhalation, ingestion, and mucous membrane contact for up to 20 hours a day. How can this happen? We talked a little bit earlier about the Toxic Substances Control Act, which ostensibly regulates chemicals in the United States. It's toothless. Enacted in 1976, it's only effectively banned 5 chemicals or chemical classes, and none since 1990. For over 20 years, the EPA has given up on banning toxic chemicals under TSCA ever since they banned asbestos in 1989 and were sued and lost because the burden of proof is so high, regardless of the scores of published studies in support. So, under TSCA, chemicals are released onto the market without being proven safe and can only be acted upon years later, if at all, when the stack of bodies gets high enough. The confidential business information protections under TSCA are so generous and sweeping that EPA has only been able to obtain adequate safety data for about 200 of the over 80,000 chemicals in commerce, with more being approved all the time. One of the speakers said earlier that really there's fewer chemicals because some of them aren't being used anymore, things of that nature, but that doesn't take into account the about 2,000 more chemicals that are added to the marketplace every year under this scheme, so without testing. So we're all exposed every day to certain chemicals such as BPA and flame retardants. I really defy any of us, to get through the day without being exposed to some form of flame retardant chemical. And these are chemicals that should never have been approved for use to begin with due to their hazard profile, especially in household products. So TSCA is working really well for the chemical industry, but not so much for anyone else, any of the rest of us. State efforts to ban certain flame retardants in certain product sectors have met with some degree of success. 12 states, including New York, have banned 2 polybrominated diphenyl ether chemicals, PBDE chemicals, penta and octa-BDE. And they're not families of chemicals, they're classes of chemicals. Families are human beings, or at least animals, but classes of chemicals. And the PBDE chemicals are named, just to give a little tiny chemistry lesson. A penta BDE has 5 bromine rings. Octa BDE has 8 bromine rings, and deca BDE has 10 bromine rings. And when penta and octa were voluntarily phased out, it was really to protect the market for deca, which was over 80% of the production volume of those 3 chemicals, penta, octa, and deca. More than 80% of what was used in commerce at that time was deca. So it was to buy time for deca, which, again, later was also phased out voluntarily in order to avoid test rules and significant new use rules under TSCA. So there are also exemptions to the phase-outs. So it doesn't, it only deals with production or importation of the chemical itself. So as you know, many of the companies, and especially baby product makers too, import, their products are made in China or outside of the United States. And so there's no prohibition at this point to importing products that contain PBDEs. It's only except for in states like New York that have banned them. And also there's a recycling exemption as well in the voluntary phase out. So products like foam can be used over and over again and be put back into products that are in our homes, like the Rebond carpet padding that goes under carpets that looks like it has sort of a marbly look to it. That's recycled foam. So anyway, just to explain the phase-out exemptions and limitations to those voluntary agreements. So unfortunately, in the absence of a federal safety net, it's relatively effortless for the chemical industry to introduce a similar chemical that's entirely unregulated and about which very little is known to replace the one that is banned, which I believe Assemblyman Kavanaugh brought up earlier. And they can keep up this toxic shell game indefinitely. For example, penta-BDE, commonly used in polyurethane foam-containing products, was replaced with chlorinated tris, which was banned in children's apparel in the 1970s due to its toxicity. So banned in apparel, right back in foam in nursing pillows. So, and New York again was in the lead in 2011 when it enacted a first-ever ban on one form of tris retardant, flame retardant, TCEP. In 2012, both houses introduced a policy phasing out another form of tris chemical, TDCPP. Unfortunately, although the Assembly passed this legislation unanimously, the Senate Environmental Conservation Committee passed it unanimously, and the governor's office notified Senate leadership the bill would be signed if it came to the governor's desk. It was never brought to the Senate floor for a vote. This inaction was repeated in 4 other states in 2012, despite broad, diverse support and minimal opposition. So TDCPP, the replacement chemical of choice for TCEP, was declared a carcinogen and placed on the California Proposition 65 list in 2011. We anticipate a labeling requirement this October and numerous state-level introductions in 2013 to ban both forms of tris. Although it's essential that the New York State Legislature continue its national leadership role in banning priority chemicals where the hazard is greatest, it's time we got off the toxic treadmill, tapped into existing resources like the Interstate Chemicals Clearinghouse, and collaborated with states that are effectively taking a broader, more systemic look at hazardous chemicals in commerce. The New York State Assembly took an enormous, unprecedented step in this direction in 2012 by passing the Child Safe Products Act, which creates a list of chemicals based on their inherent hazardous attributes, creates a smaller priority list based on their use in children's products, and requires disclosure of the use of these priority chemicals in children's products so parents can get some information, and bans these priority chemicals outright by a date certain. It also codifies New York's participation in an interstate chemicals clearinghouse to leverage shrinking resources and share data among states with similar policies. So the Assembly should certainly be commended for this show of leadership and articulating such a strong position on protecting children from toxic chemicals in products. New York's a large state, with a big economy, big population. Therefore, whatever this legislature does and is able to accomplish here creates a tipping point for federal reform while protecting its own residents, especially the most precious and vulnerable, our children. So, I mean, I hope we can all just agree that their products don't belong in our bodies, and especially the bodies of newborn babies before they've even, taken their first breath. And I thought the airplane versus stroller informed risk conversation was very rich. And what it reminds me of, really, risk in general, is are you going to put a baby gate at the top of the stairs, or are you going to put pillows on the bottom of the stairs? Okay? And really, it's just been such a failure to protect people from toxic chemicals that, it's another system that's really working well for the chemical industry and not so much for the rest of us. So, and in terms of labeling, which we'll now get some labeling from the Proposition 65 for TDCPP, because they'll label it everywhere, not just for California, generally speaking. For some reason, if you look at a nursing pillow or a dog bed or anything, it'll say 100% polyurethane foam. When it says outer level, 50% cotton, 50% polyester, inner, and it'll say 100% polyurethane foam, even though it's like 6%. We're not talking parts per million here. In a couch, there's probably a couple of pounds of a cancer-causing chemical. In a nursing pillow, it's 6% of the total weight, and it's not on the label. So that's interesting, and maybe something could be done legislatively about that as well. So, and my colleague mentioned externalizing costs, and that's just exactly what the chemical industry has managed to do, is externalize their costs onto every other segment of the economy, and to a great extent on government. If you're looking at learning disabilities, you're looking at, I'm sure my colleague Stephen Bose will talk more about this, but it impacts on employment, it impacts incarceration, it impacts teen pregnancy, and lots of other aspects of the economy. So, as well as, the illness, the health care costs, which are an enormous percentage of any government budget. So, thank you very much for that.